I never imagined a 2-week vacation would almost cost me my home. Not from a fire, a flood, or some other act of God, but from the meticulously planned audacity of my neighbor. I suppose I should have seen it coming. People like her, the ones who radiate an aura of supreme entitlement, don't just stumble into malevolence. They cultivate it like a prize-winning, venomous orchid. My name is Alex. By trade, I'm a forensic accountant, a job that most people find mind-numbingly dull. For me, it's a calling. I find a serene beauty in untangling complex knots of deception, following Safravoy breadcrumbs until a neat, undeniable picture of fraud emerges. It's a skill set I usually leave at the office. My home, a quiet house nestled by a lake, is my sanctuary, my escape from the world of ledgers and lies. That peace was shattered the moment I pulled into my driveway, a full 3 days early from a business trip to Asia. There, staked brazenly into my pristine lawn, was a garish red and white for sale sign. And standing beside it, gesturing expansively at my porch, was my neighbor, Karen Shipley, talking to a nervous-looking couple. What she didn't know, as she smiled her predatory, toothy grin, was that my job wasn't just about crunching numbers. It was about meticulously dismantling fraudulent schemes. And she had just handed me my next case file, pro bono. Have you ever had a neighbor who thought their property line extended to the entire zip code, including the contents of your house? Let me know in the comments. Stick around, because the story of how I used my very particular set of skills to not just stop her, but to completely unravel her petty empire of entitlement is one for the books. I cut the engine and sat there for a moment, a wave of cold, disbelieving anger washing over me. This was my home. I'd spent years saving for it, dreaming of this specific view of the water, this specific patch of quiet. Seeing that sign felt like a physical violation. I got out of the car, my travel fatigue vanishing, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. I walked calmly across the lawn, my rolling suitcase clicking softly on the pavement behind me. Karen's back was to me, and she was in full sales pitch mode. The owner is very motivated, she was saying, her voice dripping with faux sincerity. A bit overwhelmed with his career, you see. He's looking for a quick, no-fuss cash deal. The couple nodded, looking intrigued. Excuse me, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a shard of glass. Karen spun around, her face a mask of shock that quickly morphed into a brittle, condescending smile. Alex, you're back early, she chirped, as if my premature arrival was a delightful surprise party. She then turned to the bewildered couple. This is Alex, the owner. We were just talking about you. I ignored her and addressed the couple directly. I'm very sorry for your wasted time, but my house is not, and was never, for sale. There's been a significant misunderstanding, Karen jumped in, her voice rising an octave. Now, Alex, don't be modest. You know you mentioned to me you were thinking of selling before you left. I was just testing the waters for you. You know how you get with all that jet lag, probably just slipped your mind. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She was trying to paint me as confused, incompetent, right on my own doorstep. Karen, I said, my voice dropping into a firm, low register. Take the sign down. Now the pleasant facade crumbled. Her eyes narrowed. I will do no such thing. We had an agreement, that was when she did it. The move that escalated this from a bizarre neighborly dispute into all-out war. She whipped out her phone and dialed 911. Yes, hello, she said, her voice now trembling with manufactured fear. I'm a real estate agent at 112 Lakeview Drive. There's a man here who appears very confused and aggressive. He's trespassing on the property I'm showing, and he's frightening my clients. I stood there, dumbfounded. She was calling the police on me. On my own property. When the two officers arrived, their expressions weary and professional, I endured the supreme humiliation of having to pull out my driver's license to prove I lived in my own house. Karen put on a tearful performance, expressing deep concern for my mental state. The officers, to their credit, saw through the charade once my ID checked out. They sternly informed her that she couldn't list a property without the owner's consent and instructed her to remove the sign. She yanked it out of the ground with a vicious tug, shot me a look of pure venom, and stomped back to her house. The officers apologized for the disturbance and left. I stood alone in my driveway, the silence ringing in my ears. The immediate threat was gone, but the injustice of it all burned in my chest. She hadn't just crossed a line. She tried to obliterate it, with me on the other side. That was her mistake. In the silent aftermath of the confrontation, the anger began to cool, crystallizing into something else entirely: cold, methodical purpose. The humiliation of having to prove my identity on my own land was a potent catalyst. This was no longer just about an obnoxious neighbor. It was about a fundamental violation. Karen Shipley hadn't just tried to sell my house. She had tried to erase me from my own life, painting me as an unstable trespasser. My professional instincts, usually dormant outside of the office, roared to life. This was a case now, and my home was the crime scene. I powered up my work-grade laptop and began to dig. Forensic accounting isn't about magic. It's about patience and the relentless pursuit of data. I started with her name, Karen Shipley. A quick search of public records was just the warm-up. The key was the real estate sign she'd so begrudgingly removed. I had taken a photo of it before I confronted her. Shipley & Sons Realty, a family business, it seemed. I delved into the state's professional licensing database. The brokerage was small, primarily run by Karen and her husband, Daniel Shipley. I cross-referenced their business with the county clerk's office, pulling property transaction records. Then I had an idea. I started looking at the local newspaper's online archives, specifically the social columns and obituaries. It was a long shot, a search for a needle in a digital haystack. But my job has taught me that predators, whether they're embezzling from a corporation or a neighbor, always have a methodology. For hours, I cross-referenced the sale dates of properties listed by Shipley & Sons with announcements of homeowners going on extended vacations, cruises, wintering in Florida, sabbaticals, and, more grimly, with recent death notices. And then, I found it. The aha moment. It wasn't just one or two coincidences. It was a clear, sickening pattern. At least 5 properties in the last 2 years had been listed by Shipley & Sons, while the owners were verifiably out of town for long stretches, or in the vulnerable period right after a family death, sometimes even before the estate had cleared probate. These were often sold quickly and, according to my cursory analysis of market values, for suspiciously low prices. Karen wasn't just an entitled opportunist. She was a predator who weaponized information, targeting the absent and the grieving. She must have seen my 2-week international trip as the perfect window. She assumed I was another easy mark. To list my house, she would have needed a listing agreement, which meant she must have forged my signature. The question wasn't whether she was a criminal, but how I could prove it in a way that was airtight and inescapable. I needed that forged document. I needed to bait the trap. My objective crystallized. This wasn't about getting a grudging apology over the fence. This was about systemic correction. I needed to dismantle her operation so thoroughly that she could never prey on another vulnerable person again. My revenge wouldn't be loud or emotional. It would be quiet, precise, and utterly devastating, presented not as a personal vendetta, but as a public service. My plan formed, each piece interlocking like the gears of a fine watch. First, I needed to coax her into delivering the primary piece of evidence, the fraudulent listing agreement, directly into my hands. To do this, I couldn't approach her myself. She already saw me as an obstacle she'd failed to bulldoze. I needed to reframe myself in her eyes as the confused, intimidated victim she initially tried to portray. The bait would be my feigned capitulation. The delivery system for this bait would be a third party, an instrument of unimpeachable authority, a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a shark. Someone whose letterhead alone would make Karen feel a flicker of fear before her arrogance reassured her that she was in control. My lawyer would contact Shipley & Sons Realty with a carefully worded message. We wouldn't threaten, we would inquire. We'd explain that their client, Mr. Alex, had time to cool off and was now reconsidering the sale. To proceed, of course, we would need copies of all relevant paperwork for our files, the original listing agreement I had signed, and the offer from those prospective buyers. This would force her to produce the forgery. Next, the buyers. Who were they? Accomplices? Or innocent pawns? My front door security camera, a simple smart home device, held the answer. I pulled the footage from the incident. The angle was perfect. As the couple scurried away from the confrontation, their car's license plate was clearly visible for a solid 5 seconds. A simple public records search would give me a name and address. They were loose and she couldn't have accounted for. Finally, the stage. A private confrontation would be unsatisfying and ineffective. Her power was rooted in her public persona within our community, the smiling, efficient, can-do neighbor. I needed to shatter that persona in a public forum. The annual Homeowners Association meeting was in 2 weeks. A quick check of the HOA website confirmed my memory. Karen Shipley was the treasurer. She would be there, at the podium, basking in the spotlight. That would be my venue. I would assemble my evidence into an irrefutable case file. The forged document she was about to send me, my travel records proving my absence, the testimony from the buyers I was about to find, and the damning pattern of her predatory listings. She thought she was a wolf hunting a sheep, but she had stumbled into the den of a sleeping bear. And I was about to wake up. The first step was to turn her potential pawns into my allies. The license plate from my security footage led me to a couple named Mark and Jenna Miller, who lived in the next town over. I approached them cautiously, not with accusations, but with a simple, honest account of what had happened. I found them at their home, a modest suburban house with toys scattered in the yard. I introduced myself and explained that I was the owner of the lake house they had viewed. At first, they were wary, defensive even. They thought I was there to blame them. But I quickly clarified my purpose. Karen Shipley told you I was a distressed seller, didn't she? I asked gently. Mark nodded slowly. Yeah. She said you were desperate for a quick cash sale to avoid foreclosure or something. She made it sound like we were doing you a favor with a lowball offer. I saw the understanding dawn on their faces as I laid out the truth, that I was abroad, that the house was not for sale, and that the entire scenario was a fabrication. To seal the deal, I showed them the preliminary research I had done on the other suspicious sales. Jenna's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. She was using us to try and steal your house. Their embarrassment quickly turned to anger. They had been manipulated, their good intentions twisted to serve a criminal enterprise. They eagerly agreed to sign a formal affidavit detailing every conversation they'd had with Karen, from the initial call to the distressed seller narrative. I now had my first key witnesses. Next, the lawyer. I found exactly who I was looking for in Ms. Davies, a sharp, semi-retired litigator with a reputation for taking on cases that offended her sense of justice. When I laid out the story in her mahogany-paneled office, a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Oh, I despise petty tyrants, she said with relish. Let's give Mrs. Shipley a call, shall we? 2 days later, an email from Ms. Davies landed in Karen's inbox. It was a masterpiece of understated professionalism, expressing my renewed interest and requesting the documentation. Karen's reply came less than an hour later. Her overconfidence was palpable even in text. Of course, she wrote, her tone dripping with smug satisfaction. So glad Alex has come to his senses. I've attached the listing agreement and the offer from the Millers. As you can see, everything is in perfect order. We should aim to close quickly before the buyers get cold feet. Attached was a PDF. I opened it, my heart hammering. There it was, a standard listing agreement for my property, filled out with all my details. And at the bottom, a clumsy, almost childishly rendered forgery of my signature. She had walked right into the trap. She believed she was on the verge of a major payday, pushing a timid homeowner into a corner. In her mind, she had already won. Her arrogance had blinded her, and that blindness was the final ingredient my plan needed. With the forged documents secured, my house transformed from a home into a war room. The next week was a blur of focused, methodical preparation. I felt the familiar thrill of the chase, the same intensity that gripped me when I was closing in on a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. But this was personal. I meticulously built my case file. I created a timeline that was as damning as it was simple, placing my stamped passport pages and airline boarding passes directly alongside the dated forgery. It was an open and shut case of impossibility. You cannot sign a legal document in North America while simultaneously sipping a coffee in a Tokyo airport lounge. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, proved to be an invaluable asset. Armed with the pattern I had uncovered, she discreetly made contact with 2 of the other families who had been victimized by Shipley and Sons. One, an elderly couple named the Hendersons, had been on a 2-month Alaskan cruise when their vacation cottage was listed and sold out from under them for a fraction of its worth. They had chalked it up to bad timing and a poor market. When Ms. Davies presented them with evidence that this was Karen's standard operating procedure, their resignation turned to righteous fury. They, too, agreed to cooperate, providing their own documents and a statement. The stage was set, the annual HOA meeting. The agenda had been emailed to all residents. Item number 4 was Treasurer's Report and Financial Overview. Presented by Karen Shipley, it was perfect. The meeting was always the most well-attended event of the year, as it was when the board voted on the annual budget and homeowner dues. No one ever missed it. I didn't just compile documents. I crafted a narrative. I built a crisp, professional PowerPoint presentation, the kind I would prepare for a corporate board audit. The slides were stark and irrefutable. A high-resolution still from my security camera showing Karen on my lawn. A slide blowing up my real signature next to her clumsy fake. A map of our community with red dots indicating the homes she had targeted, complete with dates that corresponded to obituaries or vacation announcements, and powerful, quoted excerpts from the affidavits of the Millers and the Hendersons. The day before the meeting, I had a brief, chilling encounter with Karen at the community mailboxes. She gave me a smile that was all teeth. "I do hope you're making the smart decision, Alex," she said, her voice a low purr. "That cash offer from my clients won't be on the table forever. It would be a real shame for this situation to get messy." The veiled threat hung in the air between us. She thought she was delivering the final turn of the screw. She had absolutely no idea that she wasn't the one holding the wrench. Her words only solidified my resolve. The trap was set. All that was left was for her to step into it. The evening of the meeting, the community hall buzzed with the low hum of neighborhood chatter. The room was packed, with well over 100 residents filling the folding chairs. I arrived early with Ms. Davies, who looked as calm and formidable as a granite statue. We found a small table near the front, and I discreetly connected my laptop to the hall's projector. I slid into a seat in the front row, a simple manila folder resting on my lap, my expression deliberately neutral. Across the room, I made brief eye contact with Mark Miller and Mr. Henderson. They gave me subtle, almost imperceptible nods. Our small conspiracy was in place. Karen made her entrance a few minutes later, sweeping into the room as if she were royalty arriving at a state function. She was dressed in a sharp, cream-colored power suit, carrying a leather portfolio, and greeted everyone with loud, performative warmth. She was in her element, the benevolent queen of the cul-de-sac. She saw me, and her smile tightened for a fraction of a second. A flicker of contempt crossed her face before she turned away, dismissing me as an irrelevant nuisance. The image was perfect, absolute, unshakable arrogance. The HOA president, a mild-mannered retiree named Bill, called the meeting to order. He droned on about landscaping budgets and the new rules for the community pool. For me and my allies, the air was thick with a tense, coiled energy. I could feel my own heartbeat, a steady, powerful drum against my ribs, but on the outside, I was a study in stillness. Ms. Davies sat beside me, her hands folded, her gaze fixed on the podium. Finally, the moment arrived. "And now," Bill announced, "for our treasurer's report and financial update, please welcome Karen Shipley." A polite smattering of applause filled the hall. Karen walked to the podium, beaming under the fluorescent lights. She adjusted the microphone, the feedback screeching for a moment. Thank you," she began, her voice smooth and confident. "As you all know, the financial health of our wonderful community is paramount. I take my fiduciary duty to each and every one of you very, very seriously." The irony was so profound it was almost comical. She was about to learn the true meaning of fiduciary duty and the price of violating it. Karen finished her presentation on the HOA's healthy finances with a flourish, closing her portfolio with a satisfying snap. "And so, in conclusion, our community is on very solid financial footing," she declared, smiling proudly at the crowd. The president, Bill, stepped back to the microphone. "Thank you, Karen. Are there any questions regarding the treasurer's report?" This was my cue. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. The manila folder was still in my hand. "Actually, Mr. President," I said, my voice quiet but clear, carrying easily through the suddenly silent room. "I don't have a question. I have a presentation." Every head turned towards me. "It's also about fiduciary duty," I continued, "and a different kind of real estate transaction being conducted in our neighborhood Karen's smile froze on her face, a brittle, painted-on thing. "This isn't on the agenda," she snapped, her voice sharp with alarm. "This is highly irregular." The president looked flustered, glancing between me and Karen. Before he could speak, Ms. Davies stood up beside me, a pillar of legal authority. "I am Alex's legal counsel," she announced calmly. "We have already conferred with the HOA's legal advisor. Given that the subject matter directly involves the conduct of a board member, a special presentation is permissible under our bylaws, Section 7, Paragraph B." She had done her homework, neutralizing any procedural objections. Bill, clearly out of his depth and unwilling to argue with a lawyer, stammered, Very well. Proceed, Alex." I walked to the front table and plugged the cable into my laptop. Karen stood by the podium, sputtering about protocol, but the audience was already captivated, a low murmur of intrigue spreading through the hall. The first slide flashed onto the large screen behind me. It was a crystal-clear, high-resolution photo of the for sale sign on my lawn. A collective gasp went through the room. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady. "My name is Alex. For the last decade, I have worked as a forensic accountant. My job is to find fraud. I never imagined I would have to do it in my own front yard." I clicked to the next slide. It showed my flight itinerary and passport stamps next to an image of the forged listing agreement. "This is the document Mrs. Shipley used to list my home for sale. As you can see, she claims I signed it on October 12th. However, as these airline and customs records show, I was approximately 6,000 miles away in Tokyo on that day." The murmuring grew louder. I moved to the signature comparison, the forgery blown up to comical proportions next to my actual, fluid signature. Then came the photo of the Millers. "These are Mark and Jenna Miller. They were told by Mrs. Shipley that I was a distressed seller, Mr. Miller. Would you care to confirm that?" In the middle of the room, Mark stood up. "That's exactly what she told us," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "She pressured us to make a low, quick cash offer." I then displayed the map of targeted homes, red dots glowing like warning lights. I gestured toward the Hendersons. Mr. Henderson rose, his elderly voice trembling with rage. "She did the same to us. She sold our cottage while we were on a cruise for our 50th anniversary." Karen had gone from flushed red to a ghastly, pale white. "Lies," she shrieked. "This is slander. You can't prove any of this." I turned to face her directly, my voice dropping to a steely, quiet calm. "On the contrary, Karen, sending a forged document across state lines via email constitutes federal wire fraud. A demonstrable pattern of targeting the vulnerable and the elderly is a textbook definition of racketeering." I clicked to my final, brutal slide. On the screen, in large, bold letters, were the legal definitions and sentencing guidelines for wire fraud and elder financial abuse from the state penal code. My attorney has already filed a comprehensive report with the State Real Estate Commission. A duplicate file has been delivered to the district attorney's office. I suspect they will have far more questions for you than I do." The room was plunged into a stunned, tomb-like silence for a long second, and then it erupted. It wasn't just murmuring now. It was a wave of angry, shocked voices. People turned in their seats, pointing, their faces masks of disbelief and betrayal. Karen's husband, Daniel, who had been sitting near the back, looking proud only moments before, now looked physically ill. He seemed to shrink in his chair, his face ashen. He was seeing his life, his business, his name, all immolating before his eyes. Karen stood frozen at the podium, a statue of pure horror. The HOA president, his face slick with sweat, banged his gavel frantically. "Meeting recessed." "This meeting is recessed," he yelled, his voice cracking. In the ensuing chaos, the community's verdict was delivered instantly and ruthlessly. As people began to stand up and file out, they created a wide, deliberate circle around Karen, shunning her as if she were contagious. She turned, her eyes searching desperately for her husband, and whispered his name. He just looked at her with an expression of utter devastation, gave a slight, final shake of his head, and walked quickly towards the exit without a backward glance. That single act of abandonment seemed to be the blow that finally shattered her. She grabbed her leather portfolio and practically fled the hall, a tidal wave of angry whispers and scornful looks chasing her out into the night. The fallout was swift and systematic. The very next day, the State Real Estate Commission issued an emergency suspension of the license for Shipley and Sons Realty, pending a full investigation. The district attorney's office confirmed they had opened a criminal investigation, and Ms. Davies informed me they were pursuing multiple felony charges. The HOA board held an emergency session, voting unanimously to remove Karen as treasurer and issuing a formal, public apology to me and the other families. The local news, smelling blood, pounced on the story. Local realtor accused of predatory scheme targeting absent homeowners. Her smiling, professional headshot was suddenly infamous, plastered across websites and news segments. Her social standing, the bedrock of her entire existence, was not just damaged, it was obliterated. Within a month, the Shipley and Sons sign was taken down from their small office downtown. The business was finished. The final nail in the coffin was the notice of divorce proceedings filed by her husband, citing irreconcilable differences and catastrophic damage to his personal and professional reputation. She had lost everything: her business, her standing, her marriage, all because she underestimated the quiet man by the lake. In the end, I got exactly what I wanted: my peace. The gnawing sense of violation was replaced by the clean, satisfying feeling of a problem solved, of order restored. My quiet lake house was once again my sanctuary, the for sale sign now just a bad memory. But the victory felt larger than just my own vindication. It had a ripple effect throughout the community that I hadn't anticipated. Chastened by the scandal, the HOA implemented sweeping new rules governing conflicts of interest and board member conduct. They even started a community watch program, a simple checklist system where neighbors would keep an eye on the homes of residents who were traveling, a direct response to Karen's methodology. The incident, as ugly as it was, had paradoxically made the community more vigilant and cohesive. The Hendersons and the other families Karen had victimized, empowered by the evidence I had uncovered, launched a class-action civil suit against her. With the criminal case moving forward, their victory was all but assured. They would recover their financial losses, a measure of justice that had seemed impossible just weeks before. Reflecting on the whole ordeal, I realized something profound about the nature of conflict. Karen operated on a simple predatory calculus. She banked on her victims being too polite, too distracted, or too intimidated to fight back. She mistook my desire for a quiet life as a sign of weakness, a fatal miscalculation. My life and my career are built on a foundation of logic, order, and integrity. When she launched an attack on my home, the very symbol of that order, she inadvertently triggered the most formidable part of my nature. She thought she was prodding a sheep and was shocked when it turned out to be a sheepdog, bred to protect the flock. The moral of this story is a simple one: never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. Bullies, grifters, and tyrants of all stripes depend on the inaction of good people. They thrive in the gray areas of politeness and fear. But when you push a person who possesses a unique combination of skill and resolve, you hand them all the tools they need to engineer your downfall. An antagonist's arrogance is the most potent ingredient for the trap they are too conceited to see. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the best defense isn't a bigger fence or a louder voice, but the quiet, relentless application of intelligence and the courage to dismantle a threat at its very source. Have you ever been forced to use your unique professional skills in an unexpected part of your personal life? I would genuinely love to hear your stories. Thank you for listening, and always remember to stand up for what's right. You might just be surprised by your own strength.